1977, heartbreak and champagne filled the air. The city was dominated by rock stars. Men with egos as large as their amplifiers, velvet coats, and wild hair. Standing at the pinnacle of the music industry beside Fleetwood Mac, Stevie Nicks observed the mayhem that was taking place all around her. She had personally witnessed the alluring force of fame, how it could transform friendships into rivalries and love into obsession. She ultimately reveals the truth about the 7 men who characterized that reckless decades later. These weren't merely celebrities. They were masters of destruction, manipulators, and heartbreakers who caused wounds that went beyond the depths of their music. For Stevie, it all started with the man who loved her the most, knew her the best, and caused her the most pain. The beginning was near home. Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie had a magical and insane romance. Success turned their love into war, even though they had first met as dreamers and lovers united by ambition and music. Their courtship had descended into silent retaliation and yelling bouts by the time Rumors was captured on tape. Lindsey was as vicious off stage as he was brilliant on the guitar. He wanted authority over her, the band, and the music. Stevie witnessed a man who lived heartbreak like a weapon and wrote it like poetry. For decades, Fleetwood Mac would be defined by their conflict, with each performance brimming with passion and rage. She staggered into the arms of another man, whose serene facade concealed an icy heart, as she attempted to flee the shadow of that grief. Consider the Eagles' shrewd, meticulous founder, Don Henley. He was seen by the world as a poet of the gloomy glitter of California. He was an unappealing individual to those who knew him. In the late 1970s, Stevie was attracted to him. Their brief romance was fueled by fame and ephemeral love. However, Henley's allure was a facade. Calculation and detachment were beneath it. He always had the upper hand, even when it came to appearance. Stevie became disillusioned with the scene she helped create when the affair ended in sorrow and distance. Henley was battling his own issues, jealousy, artistic conceit, and the gradual disintegration of a band founded on competitiveness behind his composed exterior. Stevie found herself yearning for something genuine, something untamed and unprotected, after Henley. She met Joe Walsh at that point, a man who lived each day as though it were his last. Henley wasn't anything compared to Joe Walsh. Unpredictably loving, humorous, and careless. He was irresistible to Stevie because, to him, he represented chaos in human form. Despite their relationship being like gasoline on an open fire, she referred to him as the love of her life. Lovely, ephemeral, and certain to burn to ashes. In addition to being a gifted guitarist, Walsh was a troubled person who was consumed by addiction, shame, and an unquenchable desire to get away. Last night, I was discussing it with your brother-in-law. Yes. About the fact that you were a member of this elite band, Fleetwood Mac, which has been around since 1975. He was already in a deep state of substance misuse when they first met, his eyes displaying a grief that no song could conceal and his laughter concealing fatigue. Long drives through Los Angeles before dawn, confessions, and laughing characterized their crazy evenings together. Lost in the delusion that they might escape their suffering, the two of them were rushing down deserted roadways with their windows down. There were times when their spirits seemed to align and the world seemed to stop. However, those times were short-lived. Every loving grin was accompanied by a crash, missed performances, erratic mood swings, and protracted silences during which love was unable to penetrate. Stevie was drawn farther into his storm despite her best efforts to save him. Dancing on the brink of ruin was what it meant to love Joe. And she was missing a piece of her heart when she eventually left. Heartbreak, however, had a way of pursuing her. In her account, the next man was more than just a romantic partner. He was her undoing, her bandmate, and her secret. Fleetwood Mac's rhythm concealed its darkest secret. Mick Fleetwood and Stevie Nicks' affair. Both were reeling from shattered relationships and unsaid tiredness when it started, in the quiet moments amid the flurry of gossip. Late hours in the studio turned into hushed confessions over half-empty brandy glasses and gloomy lighting. Behind his drums, Mick, tall and authoritative, exuded a loneliness that reflected her own. Tormented by fame and married, he took solace in Stevie's delicate warmth. What began as short-term comfort quickly became a hazardous addiction. Although they understood the price would be disastrous, they were as dependent on one another as oxygen. They had a disastrous and euphoric romance. A band that was already falling apart was made more tense by every snatched glance during practice and every note sang too near. Friendships fell apart like broken glass when the truth came to light, and the togetherness and power that had formerly characterized the Fleetwood Macs crumbled beneath the weight of their emotions. Nicks and Stevie fell in love quickly, and it left scars that never went away when it was over. However, their chemistry persisted in the music despite their grief. A different kind of storm was building beyond their circle while the drama around Fleetwood Macs dominated the news. One headed by David Crosby, Laurel Canyon's wayward poet. David Crosby, the rock philosopher, had a personal life in ruins and an intellect as sharp as his tongue. In the Laurel Canyon era of the mid-1970s, when musicians wandered aimlessly between studios and homes in search of inspiration, Stevie first encountered him. Crosby had a deep and infectious laugh, his discussions were seductive, and his charm was intellectual. Always surrounded by guitars, smoke, and the subtle chaos of too many ideas colliding at once, he exuded a poet's air. He seemed to constantly pursue something he could never quite grasp, living in a state of flux between reality and dream. But beneath that contemplative facade, Behu was a tornado of impulse and devastation. He had already lost acquaintances and almost his career due to his drug addiction and womanizing. In real time, Stevie watched him fall apart. The never-ending gatherings where everyone feigned happiness. The recording sessions where he would lose his anger. After too many powder nights and too little sleep, the stairs were deserted. It was like witnessing the decade itself crumble beneath the weight of its own excess as Crosby's demise occurred. Stevie will soon encounter a different kind of legend, one whose suffering mirrored her own, encased in the eerie blues. Stevie joined Eric Clapton, who was already a living legend. A man unable to heal his own heart but capable of making a guitar cry. He had an irresistible charisma. His eyes were filled with secrets that fame could never conceal, and his voice was tinged with melancholy. A blues genius who transformed suffering into poetry, he was untouchable in the eyes of the world. Behind the scenes, however, his life was a war zone of sorrow and treachery. Stevie encountered a man plagued by his own mythology when they met. A celebrity with everything and nothing at the same time. His liaisons with well-known women made headlines. However, beneath the headlines were quiet nights, medication, and a never-ending quest for purpose. Tension permeated their interactions, a peculiar bond between two individuals who were all too familiar with the cost of celebrity. Clapton's narrative mirrored her own, revealing the pain behind brilliance and the loneliness behind praise. Bob Welch's grief, however, was encased in subdued tragedy, whereas Clapton's grief was buried under blues. Bob Welch served as the link between Fleetwood Mac's blues beginnings and their rock star status prior to their meteoric rise to popularity. Both as a musician and as a kind person tormented by the same spirits she carried, Stevie had held him in high regard. He wasn't as boisterous or cocky as other people in their group. He was incessantly inventive, perceptive, and insightful. Bob's musical sense revolutionized Fleetwood Mac's sound and paved the way for their eventual international renown. But when success approached, he was pushed aside by internal strife, business demands, and the appearance of new people. Stevie observed how egos louder than his own eclipsed his modest genius. In 1974, Bob's departure from the band was more than just a resignation, it was a heartbreak. Bob was left to observe from the sidelines while the group progressed and rose to superstardom. The world forgot him too soon, despite his best efforts to rebuild. After that, depression crept into every part of his existence. His tale served as a sobering reminder of the negative effects of celebrity. Not only achievement, but also peace, dignity, and identity. Years later, when Stevie learned of his passing, it was like an unfinished song. A line that is left out of harmony. She came to the realization that all of the men she had known, friends, lovers, and rivals, were more than simply stories from her past as she stood by herself in the silence that followed. And period that had burned too brightly was represented by these living ghosts. The sparkle was reduced to dust before the end of the decade. Los Angeles's dazzling lights, which had once represented hope and endless nights, now served as a constant reminder of all that had been lost. Stevie had gained glory, love, and fame in the 1970s, but he had also lost a lot of things. The beating pulse of a generation, her voice held memories and tales of men that had scarred her. She had witnessed the demise of people she cared about due to vanity, addiction, and the delusions of grandeur. Carrie is a ghost by all names. Beneath the rhyme and rhythm of each song is a confession. Joe's laughter faded into stillness, Lindsay's rage, and confused guilt. In her lyrics, they endured eternally. The 70s womanizers were more than simply romantic partners. They represented a time when success ate up the soul and want triumphed over reason. Years later, Stevie came to terms with the reality as she stood on stage with the audience cheering in front of her. She was older than all of them. In endurance, not in ego. She had transformed suffering into poetry, and the men she had previously loved had become ghosts and legends, ensnared in their own narratives. Imagine this. The passion, the rage, and the song were all things of the past. The stage was deserted, the lights were low, and the echoes were fading into silence. Stevie Nicks, however, was still standing somewhere in the silence beneath the remains of the spotlight, her shawl grazing the ground, her eyes brimming with the memories of every song she had ever performed. She had survived the conflagration and emerged triumphant. Finally, she had given herself the goal of narrating the tale of people who burned too brightly.